I'm Tyler Kensington. I'm 33 years old. And until that Wednesday morning at exactly 4:58 a.m., I thought I had a stable, predictable life in the condo I bought in Bay Ridge, Philadelphia. The kind of place I worked my ass off for as a network engineer, the kind of place that was supposed to feel secure, solid mine. Instead, I woke up to the violent scrape of dresser drawers being yanked open so hard they hit the stops and rattled, the sharp metallic clatter of hangers being ripped from the closet rod, and the unmistakable sound of fabric being stuffed in a luggage with urgency. At first I thought I was dreaming, that maybe it was construction outside, or one of those half-conscious moments where sounds blend into nonsense. But then I saw her silhouette moving fast across the bedroom, illuminated by the pale blue glow of the streetlights slipping through the blinds. Brianna Sloan, my long-term girlfriend of 4 years, was standing at the foot of our bed, barefoot, hair pulled into a messy knot like she had planned this down to the smallest detail, and she was shoving clothes into 2 huge suitcases that were already half full. She wasn't folding anything, wasn't hesitating, just grabbing armfuls of her dresses, jeans, sweaters, even the expensive coats I bought her last winter, and compressing them down with both hands like she needed to make them fit no matter what. The zipper teeth screeched every time she forced them closed and reopened them to cram in something else, and the entire room felt charged, like the air before a storm breaks. I pushed myself up on my elbows, heart pounding, still foggy from sleep, and I asked her what the hell was going on, my voice thick and confused because there was no warning, no fight the night before, nothing that could explain why she was acting like she was evacuating a burning building. She didn't flinch at the sound of my voice, didn't slow down, didn't even look guilty. She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see her expression, and what hit me wasn't sadness or regret. It was irritation, like I had interrupted her routine, like I was an inconvenience she had to deal with before finishing something far more important. Her eyes looked flat, focused, almost bored, and she exhaled sharply through her nose as if I was the one making this harder than it needed to be. There was no trembling in her hands, no tears streaking her cheeks, no dramatic speech building up in her throat. She looked prepared. She looked rehearsed. Every movement was efficient and deliberate, as if she had mentally walked through this scene 100 times and was now just executing it. I remember noticing small details that felt absurdly loud in my head, like the way the wheels of one suitcase were already angled toward the door, positioned for a quick exit, and how her toiletries bag was neatly zipped and placed on top of the pile. Ready to go, I sat there in the dim light, the digital clock on my nightstand still glowing 4:58 in red numbers that felt burned into my vision, trying to process how my home, my bedroom, had turned into a departure terminal in less than 60 seconds. The condo that I had signed every document for, negotiated every payment for, painted and furnished with care, suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was a guest in my own life. And the worst part wasn't even the packing. It was the way she looked at me, like my existence was the problem, like waking up beside me was some burden she had finally decided to drop before sunrise. Brianna finally stopped long enough to zip one of the suitcases shut with a hard, decisive pull, and then she straightened up and faced me fully, arms crossed like she was about to deliver a speech she had practiced in the mirror, and she told me in a calm, rehearsed voice that she needed to find herself because I was controlling, that she felt suffocated, that I was always hovering, always expecting something from her. And I remember sitting there still half under the covers, trying to understand how expecting basic adult responsibilities had been twisted into some kind of character flaw. She said it like she was explaining something obvious to a child, like it was self-evident that splitting the $3,650 in monthly household costs was oppressive, like asking her to contribute to the mortgage, utilities, HOA fees, insurance, internet, and groceries in a place we both lived in was some form of financial imprisonment rather than shared responsibility. She kept talking, pacing now, stepping around the suitcases as if she was giving a TED Talk about personal liberation, and she listed examples of my so-called controlling behavior, like how I had asked her to Venmo her half of the electric bill on time instead of 3 weeks late, like how I had wanted to know why she was out past 1 in the morning on weeknights without a text, like how I had mentioned that disappearing until 2 a.m. and coming home smelling like tequila without explanation wasn't exactly respectful in a relationship where we lived together. She framed all of it as surveillance, as emotional restriction, as me policing her freedom, and she used words like autonomy and growth as if those words magically erased the fact that I was the one covering most of the financial load when she forgot, or was short this month. Then she delivered the line she clearly believed would shatter me, the kind of sentence someone saved for maximum emotional impact. And she said that it was her life, and she could leave any time, that she didn't owe anyone explanations, that she refused to feel trapped by expectations, and she watched my face carefully when she said it, like she was waiting for me to crack, to beg, to promise to change, to throw dignity out the window in exchange for not being abandoned before sunrise. There was this faint smugness in her expression, like she expected tears or bargaining, like she thought I would scramble to reassure her that she was right and I was wrong and that I would do anything to keep her there. Instead, I felt something inside me go still, not numb exactly, but clear, like the static had finally cut out and all the signals lined up. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't try to dismantle her logic piece by piece, because in that moment I realized that if she truly believed shared expenses and basic communication were control, then we were already living in two different realities. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stood up slowly, and walked to the small tray near the entry table where I kept the keys, and I picked up the keys to the Jeep Grand Cherokee I had been paying for every single month, the one she drove more than I did, the one registered in my name, insured under my policy, maintained with my money. I took the garage fob clip to the key ring and the spare key to the condo unit, the one she had used countless times without thinking about the fact that it represented legal access, not emotional entitlement. I sat there in the dim light, the digital clock on my nightstand still glowing 4:58 in red numbers that felt burned into my vision, trying to process how my home, my bedroom, had turned into a departure terminal in less than 60 seconds. The condo that I had signed every document for, negotiated every payment for, painted and furnished with care, suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was a guest in my own life. And the worst part wasn't even the packing, it was the way she looked at me, like my existence was the problem, like waking up beside me was some burden she had finally decided to drop before sunrise. Brianna finally stopped long enough to zip one of the suitcases shut with a hard, decisive pull, and then she straightened up and faced me fully, arms crossed like she was about to deliver a speech she had practiced in the mirror, and she told me in a calm, rehearsed voice that she needed to find herself because I was controlling, that she felt suffocated, that I was always hovering, always expecting something from her. And I remember sitting there still half under the covers, trying to understand how expecting basic adult responsibilities had been twisted into some kind of character flaw. She said it like she was explaining something obvious to a child, like it was self-evident that splitting the $3,650 in monthly household costs was oppressive, like asking her to contribute to the mortgage, utilities, HOA fees, insurance, internet, and groceries in a place we both lived in was some form of financial imprisonment rather than shared responsibility. She kept talking, pacing now, stepping around the suitcases as if she was giving a TED Talk about personal liberation, and she listed examples of my so-called controlling behavior, like how I had asked her to Venmo her half of the electric bill on time instead of 3 weeks late, like how I had wanted to know why she was out past 1 in the morning on weeknights without a text, like how I had mentioned that disappearing until 2 a.m. and coming home smelling like tequila without explanation wasn't exactly respectful in a relationship where we lived together. She framed all of it as surveillance, as emotional restriction, as me policing her freedom, and she used words like autonomy and growth as if those words magically erased the fact that I was the one covering most of the financial load when she forgot, or was short this month. Then she delivered the line she clearly believed would shatter me, the kind of sentence someone saves for maximum emotional impact, and she said that it was her life and she could leave any time, that she didn't owe anyone explanations, that she refused to feel trapped by expectations, and she watched my face carefully when she said it, like she was waiting for me to crack, to beg, to promise to change, to throw dignity out the window in exchange for not being abandoned before sunrise. There was this faint smugness in her expression, like she expected tears or bargaining, like she thought I would scramble to reassure her that she was right and I was wrong and that I would do anything to keep her there. Instead, I felt something inside me go still, not numb exactly, but clear, like the static had finally cut out and all the signals lined up. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't try to dismantle her logic piece by piece, because in that moment I realized that if she truly believed shared expenses and basic communication were control, then we were already living in two different realities. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stood up slowly, and walked to the small tray near the entry table where I kept the keys, and I picked up the keys to the Jeep Grand Cherokee I had been paying for every single month, the one she drove more than I did, the one registered in my name, insured under my policy, maintained with my money. I took the garage fob clip to the key ring and the spare key to the condo unit, the one she had used countless times without thinking about the fact that it represented legal access, not emotional entitlement. I walked back into the bedroom and held them out in my palm, not aggressively, not dramatically, just calmly, like I was handing over a receipt that itemized the cost of independence she was claiming. My hand didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I simply extended the keys toward her, the metallic weight of them cold against my skin, and let the silence settle between us, heavy and undeniable. Because if it was her life, and she could leave any time, then she could also leave without the car I was financing, without the garage access tied to my name, without the spare that symbolized trust she had just redefined as control. She grabbed the suitcases with sharp, dramatic movements, the wheels thudding loudly against the hardwood as she dragged them toward the front door, and I could feel the tension in the air, like she was waiting for something cinematic to happen, like she expected me to block the doorway, to plead, to grab her wrist, and tell her she was making a mistake, but I did none of that. I simply stepped aside and watched her struggle slightly with the weight of her own exit. When the door finally swung open, the early morning air spilled into the condo, cool and damp, carrying the distant hum of delivery trucks and the faint metallic scent of the city waking up, and she paused just long enough to glance back over her shoulder, her expression sharp, almost challenging, as if daring me to chase after her. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. The moment she crossed the threshold, I closed the door behind her with deliberate calm and turned the deadbolt until it clicked firmly into place, that small mechanical sound louder in my head than any shouting could have been. I stood there for a few seconds in the silence that followed, the condo suddenly feeling cavernous and still, and instead of collapsing into some emotional spiral, I walked straight to my office desk and opened my laptop. By the time business hours officially began, I had already started dismantling every shared thread that tied her to my finances and my property. I logged into my primary bank account and removed her as an authorized user, making sure her name was no longer attached in any capacity. Then I transferred the remaining balance out of the joint checking account into my individual one, leaving just enough to keep it technically active until I could close it completely. I called the bank directly to cancel the debit card issued in her name and froze the credit card she had been using for groceries and gas, making it clear that any attempt to use it would be declined immediately. Next, I contacted my auto insurance provider and instructed them to remove her as a listed driver on the Jeep Grand Cherokee, confirming that as of that morning, she was no longer covered under my policy and documenting the change with a time-stamped email confirmation. I then called the lender financing the vehicle and informed them that the car might be in the possession of someone no longer authorized to operate it under my policy, ensuring there was a formal record in case anything escalated. I was calm, methodical, almost clinical, writing down confirmation numbers, names of representatives, times of calls, treating it like a network outage I needed to contain before it spread. I booked a locksmith for same-day service to change the front door lock, the balcony access lock, and to reprogram the keypad entry system in the garage, specifying that I wanted all previous codes wiped and replaced. I reset the security system password and enabled two-factor authentication on the monitoring app, then updated the recovery email to one she had never had access to. After that, I moved through every digital account we had ever shared or logged into from the same network, changing passwords for the Wi-Fi router, the streaming platforms, the smart thermostat, the utility portals, the cloud storage, and even the grocery delivery account, logging out all active sessions to ensure there were no lingering devices still connected. By mid-morning, every financial, physical, and digital doorway that had once been casually shared was locked down with precision, and there was no dramatic confrontation, no emotional outburst, just a quiet, systematic severing of access that ensured she couldn't come back, in any form, not with a key, not with a garage code, not with a saved password, not even through a remembered Wi-Fi connection. By lunchtime, my phone was vibrating nonstop against the kitchen counter where I had left it charging, the screen lighting up every few seconds with her name flashing over and over again like an emergency alert. And when I finally picked it up, there were more than 20 missed calls and a stream of texts escalating in tone from confusion to outrage to full-blown accusation. She said her card had been declined at a gas station, that she was humiliated standing there while the transaction failed, that I had embarrassed her on purpose. And within minutes, the language shifted from inconvenience to outrage as she started calling it financial abuse, typing in all caps about how I was trying to control her even after she left, how I was punishing her for choosing herself, how this was exactly why she had to get out. I read every message slowly before responding, not because I doubted my actions, but because I wanted to make sure I answered once and clearly instead of reacting emotionally. I reminded her in a single-measure reply that the card she was referring to was issued under my account, tied to my credit, and funded by my income, and that over the past year she had contributed exactly $0 toward the household, while rotating through what she called brand rep gigs, short-term promotional contracts that paid inconsistently and somehow always seemed to leave her short when rent was due. I pointed out that for over 12 months I had covered the mortgage, HOA fees, utilities, internet, insurance, groceries, and her half of everything without reimbursement, not as leverage, but as a simple factual timeline. Her response came almost immediately, accusing me of keeping score, of weaponizing money, of acting like a landlord instead of a partner. And when she threatened to call a lawyer, I felt a strange calm settle over me again. The same clarity I had that morning when I handed her the keys. I called her instead of texting, because I wanted there to be no ambiguity in tone. And when she answered, she launched into a rehearsed speech about rights and shared living and implied equity, but I cut through it with steady, deliberate sentences. I told her bluntly that the condo is legally mine, purchased before we moved in together, titled solely in my name, financed solely under my credit, and that every bill associated with it is tied directly to me. I told her that her name is on nothing, not the deed, not the mortgage, not the utility accounts, not the vehicle registration, not the insurance policies, not the credit cards. I explained that leaving before dawn with her belongings constituted her decision to vacate the residence, not an eviction, not coercion, not force. I kept my voice even, not sarcastic, not heated, just factual. She tried to pivot, saying she still had rights because she had lived there, that relationships created obligations, that I could not just shut her out financially overnight, and I reiterated that access to my personal bank accounts and credit lines was a privilege I extended while we were together, not a legal entitlement. I told her if she wanted to involve lawyers, she was free to do so, but I was confident in the documentation, the ownership records, the payment history, and the timeline of her voluntary departure. I did not insult her, did not threaten her, did not escalate. I simply laid out the structure of reality as it existed on paper. When the call ended, there was no screaming, just a tense silence followed by her abrupt hang up, and I set the phone back down on the counter knowing that what she was labeling as abuse was in fact the first time I had drawn a boundary that did not bend under guilt or theatrics. That afternoon, after the calls and the accusations and the sudden quiet that followed, I made a decision that felt less emotional and more structural, like reinforcing a foundation after discovering cracks in the walls. And I reached out to someone I trusted in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with stability. Megan Hart, 31, lived 2 floors down and worked as a veterinary tech at a clinic nearby. And over the past year, we had run into each other in the parking garage or by the mailboxes enough times to exchange small talk about work, about the building, about the absurd rent prices creeping up across the city. A few weeks earlier, she had mentioned, almost offhandedly, that her landlord was raising her rent again and that she was drowning trying to keep up on a single income, juggling long shifts surrounded by anxious pet owners and injured animals. I stood in the spare bedroom that afternoon, the one with its own bathroom and decent closet space, the room that had mostly been used for storage and the occasional visiting relative, and I looked at it differently for the first time, not as extra space, but as an opportunity to rebalance the environment inside my own home. I texted Megan and asked if she was serious about looking for something more affordable, explaining that I had a room available and that if she was interested we could talk details. Her response came within minutes, cautious but hopeful, and by that evening we were sitting at my kitchen island, discussing numbers in a straightforward, almost businesslike way. I offered the room month to month for $900, utilities included, a simple written agreement with clear terms about shared spaces, quiet hours, and responsibilities. Nothing complicated, nothing predatory, just clean expectations on paper. She read through it carefully, asked a few practical questions about parking and storage, and then nodded with visible relief, saying it would cut her current rent nearly in half and give her breathing room she had not had in years. Within days, she signed, transferred the first month electronically, and scheduled her move. When she arrived that weekend, she brought a modest amount of furniture, neatly packed boxes, and an older rescue cat named Jasper, whose carrier she carried with careful hands, speaking to him softly, as if reassuring both of them at once. The energy in the condo shifted almost immediately, not dramatically, not in some over-the-top transformation, but in small, measurable ways. There was no tension humming in the background, no passive-aggressive silences, no sudden accusations about control or freedom. Megan unpacked efficiently, kept her belongings contained to her space, and thanked me more than once for the opportunity, her gratitude genuine rather than performative. By Sunday evening, the spare room was arranged with her bed made, a small desk set up by the window, and Jasper curled in a sunbeam near the bathroom door, and the condo felt orderly, calm, almost reset. There were no slammed drawers at dawn, no cryptic late-night disappearances, no financial imbalance silently building resentment under the surface. In one weekend, the atmosphere felt lighter, more adult, more grounded, and the decision I had made that afternoon, the one that made everything irreversible, also made the space finally feel like mine again, shared by choice rather than obligation. A week later, just as the condo had settled into a steady rhythm that felt almost therapeutic in its normalcy, my phone buzzed with a building access notification. The kind that logs failed entry attempts, and I already knew before I checked the camera feed who it was. Brianna was standing at the main entrance in oversized sunglasses and a jacket she used to borrow from my closet, her posture rigid, her movements sharp and impatient as she pressed her deactivated garage fob against the sensor again and again, as if repetition would override the system. The red light blinked each time, unresponsive, indifferent, and when that failed, she moved to the intercom panel, punching in my unit number repeatedly, flooding my phone with connection requests that I ignored. From the security app, one watched her pace in front of the glass doors, talking animatedly to no one in particular, likely rehearsing whatever confrontation she had planned, and when no one buzzed her and she followed another resident inside before the door fully closed. Minutes later, the pounding started against my unit door, heavy, frantic, echoing through the hallway in a way that felt invasive rather than desperate. Megan was in the kitchen at the time, rinsing out Jasper's food bowl, and she froze for a moment when the banging intensified, her eyes widening slightly before she looked at me, silently asking what was happening. Brianna's voice carried clearly through the door, sharp and indignant, insisting that she lived there, that I had no right to lock her out, that this was still her home. She rattled a handle, as if the physical act of turning it would somehow rewrite the last week, then pounded again, each strike landing with a hollow thud against solid wood reinforced with new hardware she no longer had access to. I walked to the door but did not unlock it, did not open it, and spoke through the closed barrier, keeping my voice even and controlled. I told her calmly that she had packed her belongings and left before dawn of her own choice, that the locks had been changed, that access had been revoked, and that there was no basis for her to claim residency after voluntarily vacating. The moment she heard Megan's voice inside, soft and steady as she resumed talking to her cat, something shifted in Brianna's tone from outrage to accusation. She immediately latched onto the narrative that I had been cheating, that Megan's presence proved she had been right about me all along, that this was the real reason I had not chased her when she walked out. Her voice rose with each sentence, escalating in a theatrical betrayal, but I stayed on the other side of the door, not matching her volume, not feeding the spectacle. I told her clearly that Megan was a tenant with a signed month-to-month agreement, that the spare room had been available, and that her decision to leave had created that vacancy. When she tried to frame it as infidelity, I answered bluntly, still through the closed door, that you cannot be cheated on by someone you packed up and abandoned, that ending a cohabitation at sunrise does not entitle you to control what happens inside the walls afterward. There was a long pause after that. The hallway suddenly quiet except for her uneven breathing, and I could almost feel the realization settling in that there would be no dramatic reunion, no door flung open, no emotional reversal. Eventually the pounding stopped, replaced by the fading echo of her footsteps retreating down the corridor, and I remained inside, the door locked, the boundary intact, the chaos kept exactly where it belonged, on the other side. Brianna did not stop after the hallway scene, because for her this had already turned into something performative, something that required an audience, and 3 days later I got a call from the front desk that she was in the lobby with her mother and her sister demanding access to the unit. I took the elevator down deliberately, not rushing, not flustered, and when the doors opened the scene was exactly what I expected. Brianna standing near the security desk with red eyes and trembling hands, her mother positioned slightly in front of her like a spokesperson, and her sister pacing in agitated circles, all three radiating the kind of energy meant to create public sympathy. Several residents were lingering nearby under the guise of checking mail or waiting for packages, but it was obvious they were watching, curious about the raised voices echoing against the marble floor. Security stood behind the desk, composed but clearly uncomfortable, their posture signaling that they would intervene if things crossed a line. Brianna's mother immediately launched into a speech about how I was cruel, how Brianna was emotionally distressed, how she simply wanted to come home, emphasizing the word home like it was a moral argument instead of a legal one. Her sister added accusations about manipulation and abandonment, layering it thick enough to make it sound like I had thrown Brianna into the street instead of responding to her voluntary departure. I did not match their volume, did not insult them, did not attempt to argue emotion with emotion, because the moment called for clarity, not theatrics. I addressed security first, keeping my tone professional, stating that Brianna no longer resided in the unit and had left of her own accord, that her access credentials had been deactivated, and that she was not authorized to enter. Then I turned slightly toward the three of them and kept it simple, asking whose name is on the deed, whose name is on the utilities, and who paid the costs associated with the property. I did not raise my voice, did not add commentary, just repeated the structure of the facts in plain language. There was a pause, brief but heavy, And for the first time, the momentum of their performance faltered because the questions were not emotional. They were concrete. Brianna's mother started to pivot toward vague statements about relationships and shared lives, but she could not answer directly. Her sister tried to frame it as fairness, but fairness does not override ownership documents, and there was nothing they could point to that contradicted the paper trail. Brianna began to cry, tears sliding down her face as she insisted that she had lived there, that it felt like home, that I was erasing her. But feelings do not rewrite deeds, and tears do not sign mortgage agreements. The longer they stood there unable to answer the simplest factual questions, the more the atmosphere shifted from sympathy to discomfort, because once the emotional narrative met documented reality, the contrast became obvious. Security, hearing the exchange, politely reiterated that access would not be granted without authorization from the registered owner, and that the building would not facilitate a domestic dispute in the lobby. The spectacle lost its power when stripped of ambiguity, and what had been staged as a dramatic attempt to reclaim something turned into an exposed imbalance of assumptions. Eventually, the raised voices quieted, the performance thinned, and the three of them retreated toward the glass doors with far less certainty than they had arrived with, because when the conversation moved away from accusations and into verifiable facts, there was nothing left for them to stand on, and facts do not bend under pressure, no matter how loudly someone cries. Her final attempt came in the form of a long, carefully worded email sent late at night. The subject line dramatic enough to suggest urgency, but the content structured like she believed she had discovered a loophole that would force my hand. She claimed she deserved the Jeep as compensation for what she called emotional labor, outlining paragraphs about how she had supported me, listened to me, stood by me, and endured what she framed as my rigid expectations, as if those intangible contributions somehow translated into legal entitlement to a finance vehicle registered solely in my name. The tone shifted between wounded and righteous, alternating between reminders of what she believed she had given and accusations that I was stripping her of something she had earned. I read the entire email once, slowly, not skimming, not reacting, just absorbing the argument as it was presented, and then I drafted a single response that was as concise as possible without being dismissive. I told her plainly that emotional labor, regardless of how one defines it, is not a legal claim to property, that the Jeep Grand Cherokee was purchased under my credit, financed through my lender, insured under my policy, and registered in my name alone. I stated that there was no contractual agreement transferring ownership, no written or verbal arrangement that altered the legal status of the vehicle, and that her personal assessment of contribution did not override documentation. I gave her a hard deadline in clear terms, specifying the date and time by which the vehicle needed to be returned to the garage or parked in a mutually accessible public location for retrieval, and I explained that failure to do so would result in the vehicle being reported as unauthorized possession. I did not threaten, did not insult, did not revisit old arguments. I simply laid out the next step in the process with the same measured tone I had used throughout. After sending it, I archived the conversation, removed her email from my primary inbox, and blocked every remaining contact method she had used, including alternate numbers and social media accounts that had begun popping up in attempts to bypass the previous blocks. There was no dramatic showdown after that, no final scene in a lobby or hallway, just silence that gradually expanded into something steady and sustainable. Within weeks, my life settled into routines that felt adult and intentional rather than reactive. The mortgage was paid without resentment attached to it. Utilities were split clearly under the new arrangement, and groceries appeared in the fridge because someone replaced what they used instead of assuming it would refill itself. Megan's presence was consistent and respectful, our communication direct and uncomplicated, the shared spaces clean without negotiation or passive aggression. Even Jasper's quiet movements across the hardwood at night felt more peaceful than the tension that used to linger in the air. The most noticeable change was the absence of constant background noise, not literal sound, but the subtle strain of carrying someone who framed responsibility as control and contribution as oppression. The condo no longer felt like a place where I had to brace for conflict or justify structure. It felt balanced, predictable in a healthy way, defined by shared responsibility instead of imbalance, disguised as partnership. The quiet was not empty. It was restorative, and in that quiet it became undeniable that what I had been carrying before was not love under pressure but weight without return, and once it was gone the difference was measurable in every ordinary, calm day that followed.